Hello again, welcome back to Project GaitWay, where we're looking at people walk and seeing what we can see. Today we have Annelise, and let's start how we normally do, just taking a look at her static alignment, and then we'll get into her video and break it down phase by phase. So front view, a reminder, this is my first time looking at her video and photos. So I'm just seeing what stands out initially and what it looks a little bit like to me. So we have something interesting with her right hip. I have this sense of her right hip being a bit more flexed than her left hip, and her right knee being a bit more flexed than her left knee. However, interesting with her right foot, you see the difference between her two feet. Looks like she has a bit of a higher arched, inverted right foot and a bit of a lower arched, less inverted left foot. The angle of her tibia on the right looks a little bit more varus, more out to the side. So that's very interesting to me. It looks like her kneecap is pointing a little bit more inward, telling me that her right femur might be more internally rotated. And I wonder if her pelvis is rotated to the left. The reason why it's interesting to me that this right foot looks a bit more inverted is that when you see a pelvis that we'll see potentially is rotated left with a femur that's internally rotated, and a knee that's more bent, that should all couple together in gait with a more pronating foot, not one that looks like it's rolled to the outside. So very interesting that there's a bit of discombobulation in that right leg. Another thing that's standing out, if I take just an overall view, is her right arm looking to be a bit out to the side, away from her body. You can also see how different her hands look. Her left hand looks like we can see all of the top surface with her palm pointing backwards. But her right hand, you can see that it's more turned externally. Is that rotation going all the way up through her arm, or is it just at her hand, wrist, or elbow? It's hard to see from this view, but I kind of have the sense that her whole right arm looks like it's externally rotating. We'll have to see what it's like from a back view. And just interesting to note the difference in her SCM muscles, sternocleidomastoid muscles at the front of her neck. You can see it more popping out on the left side than the right side. So a difference in the activity of her muscles of her neck, one side to the other. She does say she has left-sided neck tension. I'm not sure if it's the front, the side, or the back of her neck. So let's spin her to a different view. Let's go back view. From the back view, we get a better sense of what her head is doing. You see her left ear much higher. Now, we don't know why that's the case, but she does have left side neck tension. And in this case, her use of the word tension is probably quite accurate because there is length there. She could just as equally have right-sided neck something that she might call tightness, but if it was her right side, do you see how that would be more of a shorter sided musculature on the right? So that we wouldn't call that tension, we'd call that more shortness based, whatever, whatever she describes the quality as. From the back view, it's a bit more clear that her right arm is more externally rotated as a whole compared to her left arm. You can see that in the direction her elbow bones are pointing. The right one more directly backwards, the left one a little bit more pointing out to the left-hand side. Don't really have a clear view of what her scapulae are doing. We have differences in her feet from the back view. Remember, from the front view, her right foot looked a lot more inverted, and it does look to be the case as well. There's more bowing inwards on her left Achilles tendon. It looks to be that the outside border of her left foot, it looks more like a concave shape. And that concave shape, that's a closing of the lateral border, which will happen when the foot pronates. Her right heel looks a little more even on the ground, but her left heel looks a bit more tipped into the inside edge, so an everted left calcaneus more so than the right. Does it look like her pelvis is sitting more over top of one foot than the other? I don't think it's a huge difference, but if I had to choose one, I would choose her right leg that she seems to be standing over a little more. And a clue to that could be what her right foot is doing. Often when we're standing more over to one leg, over time, if that becomes a habit that we've formed, then it will drag our pelvis over towards that foot. Or sorry, I said that backwards. I was thinking two streams of thought at the same time. If we have a pelvis that's sitting more over a right foot, then the right foot will take on more of a shape of inversion. But I was also saying it the opposite way around, where if we have a foot that for whatever reason is holding an inverted posture, it will also pull the pelvis towards it over time, potentially. So which is the chain? Bottom up, top down, both, we don't know. From this view as well, I'm not sure if we're seeing a rotation in her pelvis to the left. Let's look at a side view. So here's our right side view. Let's quickly compare it to a left side view. Something that we can see is the amount of forward-headedness we have. Oh, one thing to note, Annelise is currently, at the time of this recording, 4 months pregnant. So this could have a bit of an impact on where her center of mass is. So that's kind of cool. She also does have a right foot hematoma between the third and fourth metatarsals. It's still sensitive. So that is quite interesting. That the posture of her right foot, that inversion in it, which side of the foot do you think that would put more of her pressure, more of the weight? Hopefully you're thinking that that kind of foot posture is bearing weight more towards the outer edge. She said it happened. I know she's giving away a bit of her history, but this one's kind of cool to know about, that she was hiking with too much of a heavy backpack on and she noticed that this started. So this might have been the foot posture that made it predisposed for her to get too much pressure on that outer side of her foot between the third and fourth metatarsals. So what led her foot to be that way, I wonder? Back to the side view. Look at her knees. Can you see how that right knee is a bit more bent and we're seeing the left knee peeking out behind it? It's always a bit tricky when there's dark colored leggings on. It always messes with my head, but you can see it here. The left knee looks a bit straighter. You can't see the right knee sticking out behind it, but here you can see how the right knee is a bit bent, making space for the left leg behind to be visible from this side. So if we have a right knee that's flexed, in theory, that should push the pelvis into a leftward rotation. Or a knee that's more extended, this left one will pull the pelvis into a leftward rotation. And that puts us into this predisposition for Annelise to maybe have an affinity for a right foot forward phase of gait with the right knee bent and the left knee straight and the pelvis rotating to the left. Anatomy and motion students right now might be thinking, oh my God, it's right suspension phase that she might be standing in right now. And let's just make a mental note about that. Will she have an issue entering right suspension or left suspension? And for those who have not studied anatomy and motion, that is our pronation or loading phase of gait. I'm getting the sense that her rib cage, it's a tough to say, but I want to say her rib cage looks to be a bit rotated to the right. Sometimes when I can't tell from this view, the back or front view, sagittal, a frontal view can show you how to observe a rotational transverse plane asymmetry. So it looks like you can see a bit more of her chest from this right side view. And from the left, it just kind of looks to me like there's less of her left side showing. That could be an illusion because we know that this arm is a bit more externally rotated. In theory, that right side external rotation of the arm would go together with a right spine rotation. Sometimes it doesn't though, so we don't want to make these assumptions that, oh, this pattern should be like this, because it's not always there. That's the problem with looking for patterns. It's that the pattern isn't always there. There's a pattern, but it might not be the pattern that you've learned to look for. Bodies are chaotic. There's so many variables that go into these analyses, or not analyses, but in how a body ends up where it is. There's so many variables. Okay, I think that is good for now. Let's check out her video. We'll watch around at full speed to see what big things stand out. We're looking for the most obvious standout things that are visible in real time. Definitely can see a bit more of a right rotation in her pelvis, or sorry, rib cage. Right center, right center, right center. So that right rotation is showing up in motion. And it does kind of look like her pelvis does left center. So when she steps forward with her right foot, notice her pelvis going left, 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 left. Oh, that's where she stood to show us her posture. Let's rewind from the beginning. So she's really set up to prefer that right foot forward based on just that rotation alone. Which is interesting because she is having that trouble with her right foot currently. One more time, let's see. Anything else that stands out? It's that right arm swinging back and out to the side with a little bit more, just a little bit more than her other arm. Yeah. Okay, let's break that down a bit. So that rotational business stood out to me. It's tough for me to say if there's one side of her body that she has a preference or an affinity for spending her time on, but let's see what stands out. Let's put her through a couple of steps here and look better today. Swing through with the right leg into a right heel strike. Right about there. what strikes me, get it? What strikes me about her heel strike is that she just lands very medially on the heel. She's almost completely like on that lateral border. There doesn't really seem to be a lot of time where she actually is on her heel before the rest of her foot lands on the ground. And it kind of looks like she is landing predominantly towards the lateral border. This view is a bit funky. Love if it was a bit lower down to the floor so we can see more clearly. But this is life. We don't always get perfect views. So that's interesting. But again, that showed up in our static assessment where she looked to be more on the outside of her right foot. So that is what she's got to work with. But what's keeping her there? I wonder. History of an ankle sprain on that side. Okay, so heel strike, just looking at this static image here, we can see how much her left heel, left rear foot, ankle, all of that is pronating when we'd like it to be supinating right now a little bit more. It's tough to say anything about her pelvis being able to shift towards her right foot because we haven't compared it to her other side, but we'd like that shift towards her right foot in the pelvis. We do see quite a bit of a rotation to the left. Let's bring her into a pronated right foot phase. Right about there. So we are seeing, I think, some hiking on the right of her pelvis. We're seeing a loss of her back foot on the floor. We want these 2 points of contact down, remember, if it's going to be a effectively supinating foot. And we're seeing a bit of a lumbar and thoracic flexion, lateral flexion to the right. But again, we have, like we saw in her static alignment, her neck is also laterally flexing to the right, giving us this hike on the left-hand side. We'd like for her head to be level. And because she's laterally flexing her spine to the right, that level head would actually be giving her some length through the right side of her neck and some shortness in the left side of her neck, but she's not getting that. Her head is staying stuck to her rib cage, so she's getting a bit of, oh, it's interesting though. So she'd be getting a bit of length up at the top here, but do you see how her with that spine laterally flexing to the right, her shoulder girdle is actually still higher on the left side. So that hike up with the left shoulder is going to kind of shorten the upper trapezius on that side. So we have a neck that's doing in the frontal plane 2 different sort of tensions, a bit longer tissues up here at the base of her skull with that left ear stretching up higher than the right ear. But down here with that shoulder shrugged up, we're getting some shortening in those lower muscles. So that's interesting. So what we would like to maybe have as a goal for Annelise is to see if she can sync up her rib cage and her skull so her rib cage is able to laterally flex to the left and to the right. with her ears both level, which would give us the alternating lengthening and shortening on either side of her neck. So I'm curious to see what will happen with her left foot forward, if we'll still see that tilt in her head. Okay, let's go into mid stance, feet side by side. It's where we'd like to see her right foot supinating. It kind of stays the same shape, not a whole lot of change in it. Although it looks like her knee, it flexes more deeply as she goes into her mid stance. Instead of extending, we'd like to see extension beginning to take place in her right knee at this moment as she's transitioning into mid stance. But we see it bending a little bit, I think, is what I'm seeing, which is moving her pelvis to a left rotation. However, if she was extending this knee, that would draw the pelvis into a right rotation, coupled with a supinating foot. None of those things are really happening. So right away, we want to ask if Annelise is able to actually rotate her pelvis to the right. What else needs to happen for a pelvis to rotate right? We need a right hip that can internally rotate. We need a right foot that can supinate. So those would be things to check for her. We still have this right shoulder lower configuration. Potentially this still happening, and still a bit more her left ear higher too. Okay, let's go into a swinging the left leg through. Always like to check the angle of the tibia when she swings through. Looks to be pretty straight on. What was the right leg like? I think it was, yeah, a bit more externally rotated. And when you see an externally rotated knee, immediately one might want to think about a more flexed knee. This external rotation should unlock the knee to flex it. And that's what we saw in her stance. Bilaterally. And here we have a tibia that's more pointing forward, so a more internally rotated tibia in comparison to her right side. And this more straightforward pointing tibia would make it easier for that knee to extend. So what does it do when she goes into a heel strike? We see her pelvis shift into her left foot. Not a lot. Do we see her pelvis rotate to the right? No, her pelvis is still pointing left. What that will do is possibly create too much internal rotation in this left hip at this particular moment in time. So I really wonder why her pelvis is rotating to the left so much. One theory, because it's fun to throw out theories and then see if they're true or just completely off, is if you remember how she was standing. We could just maybe quickly go back to her photo. And remember this right ankle that looked more everted, more bowed in? Sometimes, let's say that's where she had a very early accident, like sprained that ankle or something happened to that leg that resulted in it adapting to be in that posture. how would the body then try to balance that out? One strategy might be to rotate the pelvis to the left in order to try from the top down to supinate that foot. So it creates a bit of homeostasis when you have a pelvis that's trying to supinate a foot, but a foot that can't supinate. In her body, it might feel like this is a 50-50 balance, but it's not ideal. So I don't know if that's true, but that's kind of where my mind wants to go here is that pelvis that can't rotate to the right like that because it needs to be rotated to the left in order for her left foot to be able to find some semblance of a supination. So let's see what's going on here. Here's her head. Does she still have that left side higher? Yeah, kind of a little bit, eh? A little bit still stuck in the same position. What could that be helping her with? Or is that the result of an injury? Okay, let's see if her pelvis actually gets into a right rotation when she lands her left foot in pronation. It does not. Her pelvis does not rotate to the right. Similar deal happening with her back foot as on the other side. There's no contact in the ball of the foot. Knee is bending a little bit too much. We'd like it to be extended there. Now, something that I kind of like to look at here is just how much it looks like the middle of her pelvis is getting on top of her leg compared to the other side. So just clock that snapshot, and then we're going to back her up to the right leg. The interesting thing is we could say that looks kind of like a hike on the right side of her pelvis there. But actually, I think what we're seeing is just that spinning out into a left rotation, which kind of causes an illusion of how much it looks like someone is getting their weight into a leg because she's just kind of swinging into it. So it might speak to the quality of how she's able to actually load into her posterior hip, into the glutes, even into like the abductor muscles here. So can she actually load her lateral and posterior glutes? Interestingly, forgot to mention this, she says that she notices her left side abductors. So her lateral hip on the left is where she feels some tightness. And she is loading into them more. This hiking of the pelvis on the left, what that will do to the muscles on the lateral hip, the like glute med, glute min, that will lengthen that stuff out. So if she's experiencing the sense of tightness there, if that's the spot that she is referring to in her language of my left abductors are tight, abductors, I wonder if that's what's going on here. She's actually loading into those muscles more easily on the left and avoiding it on the right, just spinning out instead to that left pelvis rotation. So as a goal for her, how would we want to balance that out? We'd want to see if she can actually adduct her right hip, if she can actually hike that right side of her pelvis, which would then shorten this spot. So we don't want her stretching that spot. We want her to shorten that spot. Okay, because look what happens next is she continues to hike into that spot quite a bit. At mid stance. Look at her head position, still higher on the left. So still too much length right at the top there at the base of her skull. So I'd love to hear, Annelise, is that one of the main spots you're feeling the tension? Is that like right at the base of your skull, or is it different? Because it might not be there that she's feeling stuff, but that's what it looks like. It might. Okay. Does her foot supinate? Not really. But her knee does extend, eh? Look at how on her left leg, her knee starts to extend, which is great. In mid-stance, we want to see her knee extending. However, nothing moves in her foot. There's no supination. In fact, if we just look a few moments forward, she pronates more. So when there's a pronation of a foot on a knee that's extending, that's kind of like not a happy knee. In fact, the only way you can get a hyperextending knee is if you have a situation like this, not super healthy movement quality of a knee to foot relationship. So I wonder if she has ever had any issues with her left ankle, left knee. Is there, it looks like something could have been knocked out of whack there. But we were looking at that knee extension, and if we compare it to what was happening when she was here in her right pronation, and how, if memory serves me, she was actually flexing her knee more. Yeah, do you see that? Her knee flexes more. I want to see that from the front view because I could be totally making that up. But to me, it almost looks like her right knee flexes more as she goes into her mid stance. But on the left side, going into mid stance, she does extend the knee. That could be a play with the lighting. I don't know, but let's see. And then we're back at the beginning. So let's watch from a front view. Main things I want to know is how comfortable are you to get your left foot forward? And can you rotate your pelvis to the right? And why? Why is that a little lacking in your system currently? Okay, let's go into, let's see this left foot swinging through to a left heel strike. That's kind of interesting with her foot there. You see how her big toe, it moves down to the floor before all the rest of her toes. Not quite like we'd want to see it. That's showing us that she's really everting that foot quite a bit too much. It doesn't really bend a whole lot. It more so kind of pushes out to the side. It doesn't flex very nicely. I wonder if you've ever had any complaints with your left knee, any discomfort on that lateral side ever. Anyway, so what's curious is that your body really does seem to be more confident stepping onto the left foot, or sorry, right foot. Ooh. However, yeah, just the difference is interesting to note in how that right foot lands on the ground compared to her left foot. So you do see how much she's landing on the outside of her foot, but still the big toe, it looks like it hits the ground first compared to all the other toes. Like she's looking for the floor with her big toe here, but she does hold this inverted foot shape. It's not a very optimal heel strike position, we'd want to see probably a bit more dorsiflexion in that ankle. So I wonder if you can dorsiflex that ankle. Did anything happen to that ankle? I mean, it's quite common to sprain both ankles. I mean, I could see it being either side if there was an ankle sprain. I'd laugh if you're like, nope, never hurt my ankles in my life. So what else is going on in that case? But I could see how either ankle could have had some trouble. Now, I wanted to see if her knee looks like it actually extends as she goes into her mid stance. It's hard to see, but it does look like there's a bit more actual bend in this knee compared to the other one. Just that when her knee bends, we'd want to see pronation in this foot. We'd want to see her going a bit more pressure into the inside here of her foot, but it looks like she's a bit more off to the side. Okay. I'm just looking at her head. Her head seems to do the most amount of tilt to the side right in this moment here. Just watch the level of her ears. So as her right leg swings through, look for when that left ear goes higher. Right there. And here is where it gets the most level. So in her left heel strike, she's more level with her head. I wonder if that happens farther along, well, in multiple footsteps. So does her head start to tilt right? Yes, it does. So we're really seeing that head tilt to the right show up in a particular moment. In particular, was a redundant sentence. And it's in this moment where she's going into a heel strike into the right foot. We're getting this lateral flexion of her spine to the right, coupled with a skull that's laterally flexing in the same direction, or a neck rather. Remember, we want to see opposition between the skull and the rib cage, not going the same way. And nor do we want her spine laterally flexing to the right when she's entering a right heel strike. So there's some discombobulation about this particular phase. And I can see why she's getting a lot of weight into that third and fourth metatarsal area where she says she's having the hematoma pain. So I guess what's keeping her there is the question. So questions that we're left with, if we want to try to wrap this up, is noticing that your left foot forward phase, like this pronation on the left, there's an excessive amount of pronation in the foot, but not enough bend in the knee. So I wonder what's going on there. I would love to hear more about the history of this leg. I'd want to know if you can pronate this foot. Like, where do you experience the pressure in this foot? Can you get pressure into the medial border? Because if what's holding your foot into that more inverted posture, is there actually a right ankle inversion sprain? Or do we have this inversion in the left or the right foot? Is the inversion there because your body is trying to shift your weight into your right foot to get away from something that is uncomfortable here on the left leg? And was there actually a head accident where maybe your head got bonked at this kind of vector and caused your left side to go higher and your neck to just get overstretched a bit up there, and it hasn't returned to a neutral resting spot with equal potential to laterally flex left or right. Head injuries, neck injuries, curious. Or is this head tilting to the right part of a strategy for trying to get your weight onto your right leg because of something that doesn't really feel trustworthy down here? I don't know. There's so many questions, and what will help us to understand where to focus our energies if we wanted to help Annelise unwind some of this would be to see what injuries are correlated with some of this discombobulation. And if those parts can move, go a little bit deeper into the assessment of how's that right foot able to pronate? How's that left foot able to supinate? If we make a change in her left foot, for example, and help it to supinate, will that give back the ability for her pelvis to rotate to the right, if that's a relationship? So those are the kind of investigations we want to do now. Annelise, I'd love if you could clarify some of your history for us. That'd be amazing. Just pop some notes into the comments of this video. And as always, the invitation is there for anyone watching to jot down any notes about what you are seeing and ask your questions in the comments, write down your observations in the comments, and let's all learn together. Thanks again, Annelise, for submitting your video. I'm really looking forward to hearing back from you.